2 months before my wedding, my mother looked me in the eye and said, "You'll understand. He needed it more than you." I smiled. Or at least, I think I did. My face felt frozen, like every muscle had forgotten how to move. Inside, something cracked. I nodded slowly, pretending like I was okay. Like what she just said hadn't torn through the core of everything I'd spent years building. But the truth? I wasn't okay. I was numb. That night, I sat in the dark staring at my phone screen. Not reading, not scrolling, just staring. The soft glow lit up my face, but the rest of the room was drowning in shadows. My hands trembled slightly, fingers twitching with the urge to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by disbelief. All I could hear was her voice replaying over and over in my head. He needed it more than you. Was I not supposed to feel hurt? Was I selfish for wanting my own wedding? For saving for years while working 2 jobs, skipping vacations, saying no to new shoes, coffee dates, dinners out, all for that one day? I had saved $24,000. Every single dollar earned and planned and tucked away for a dream wedding by the ocean. Nothing flashy, just something intimate, warm, personal. Something that felt like me. And now? Gone. My mother sat me down in the living room. The place smelled faintly of lemon polish and fading lilac air freshener, like it always did. Dad was there too, sunk into his recliner, avoiding my eyes. I remember watching the way Mom fidgeted with the sleeve of her cardigan. She never did that unless she was nervous. "Kyle got in a bit of trouble," she began, her voice overly gentle. "And, well, we figured he's been struggling. You're always so strong, Ava. You always find a way." She paused, then gave me that sad smile, the kind that says, "I know this is going to hurt you, but I'm going to do it anyway. We used your savings to help him get back on his feet." I didn't speak, not right away. I looked at Dad. His eyes darted to the floor. No words, no explanation, just that same tired look he always wore when Mom made decisions and he followed. And Kyle? Of course, he wasn't there. He never was when things got messy. I asked, "How much?" "All of it," she said, blinking hard like that would soften the blow. "He really needed it." I just nodded. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed still. No tears, no yelling, just a weird floating sensation, like I wasn't even in my body anymore, like I was watching it all from outside the window. I said, "Okay," just that. Then I left. Daniel, my fiancé, was waiting for me in the car. When I got in, he looked at me like he could tell something was wrong, his eyebrows knit together, his hand reaching for mine. "What happened?" he asked. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "They gave our wedding fund to Kyle." He blinked. "What?" "All of it," I said, staring out the windshield. "They said I'd understand." Silence. Then Daniel exhaled, long and slow. "So, what do you want to do?" I didn't answer right away. My brain felt like a spinning top, but somewhere, underneath the heartbreak, something else flickered. Not anger, clarity. I looked over at him and said, "We're still getting married. Just not how they think." And in that moment, a new kind of plan began to form. Before all this, my life felt like it was finally aligning. After years of clawing my way up in the marketing world, I'd landed a job that paid well, gave me freedom, and finally allowed me to breathe. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, independent, stable, and I was in love. Daniel and I met at a networking event 3 years ago, while everyone else was throwing around buzzwords and pretending to be someone they weren't. He just listened. He asked me how I was actually doing. He remembered that I liked my coffee with oat milk and no sugar. He noticed things. When he proposed, it wasn't flashy. No cameras, no staged rooftop, just us on a hike on top of a hill, with the wind in our hair and the city behind us. He pulled out a simple ring and said, "Let's build something real." That's all I ever wanted. And when we started planning the wedding, I told him not to worry about the money. I had it covered. I'd been saving since I was 25, ever since I realized that relying on my family meant signing up for disappointment. Because growing up, everything revolved around Kyle. My younger brother could crash the car, drop out of school, max out credit cards, and my parents would always find a way to excuse it. He's just figuring himself out, they'd say, or he has potential, he just needs time. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the fixer, the planner, the one who stayed home during spring breaks to work extra hours, the one who never needed help. At first, I wore that like a badge of honor. Being the strong one made me feel proud. But over time, I realized it was just another way for them to say, "You're on your own." Still, I tried to include them in the planning. I sent Mom pictures of dresses, asked her to taste cakes with me, even suggested Kyle could walk me down the aisle with Dad. She said she was proud of me, that I was doing everything right. But I should have known better. I remember sitting in my little apartment surrounded by swatches of fabric, Pinterest boards, venue quotes, feeling this quiet joy, a soft, steady hum of excitement, the kind that fills your chest when something beautiful is about to happen. I was creating something sacred, a celebration of love, of survival, of finally being seen. But when they took that money, without telling me, without even asking, it was like they reached into my chest and snuffed that joy out like a candle. They didn't just take the cash, they took my moment. They looked me in the face and said he needed it more. Not "you deserve this," not "we're sorry," just that. And the worst part? They expected me to carry on like it didn't matter, like I'd understand, like I'd just downsize to a local hall and move on. But how do you shrink your dream to fit inside someone else's failure? I couldn't. So I sat there, heart pounding, tears long dried up, looking at a future I hadn't expected, and said something I didn't even know I meant until the words came out. "We're still getting married, just not how they think. Because if they weren't going to give me the wedding I deserved, I'd build one without them, and I'd make sure they saw it. But not right away. First, they'd have to believe the lie." The next few days felt like living in someone else's skin. I'd go to work, smile during meetings, answer emails like nothing had happened, but underneath, I was unraveling. Every time I looked at my calendar, saw the countdown to the wedding, I felt like I was choking. The wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was the one thing that made me feel like I mattered. And now, it was a charity case. Mom called 2 days later, casually suggesting we just keep it small, maybe use the community hall down the road. "It'll still be lovely," she said. "You don't need all the fuss." I wanted to scream, not because I needed a lavish wedding, but because she had stolen my choice and was now rewriting the story like she was doing me a favor. Every time she said "we" or "us" or "it's best," my stomach twisted. There was no "we." There was her decision and me expected to smile through it. I started avoiding her calls. Then Kyle texted me, "Thanks for understanding. I'll pay you back one day." A single line, no apology, no remorse. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to write back something sharp, something to make him feel the weight of what he'd taken. But I didn't, because Kyle never got it. He never had to. Mom always shielded him from consequences. And now, she expected me to do the same. I told Daniel everything, every word, every tone shift, every unspoken expectation. He listened, jaw clenched, his thumb tracing circles into my palm like he was trying to rub the tension away. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "Whatever you want to do, we'll make it work." And that's when the idea first cracked open. A flicker. What if we played along? What if I gave them exactly what they thought they wanted? A small hall wedding, a modest setup, just a little event that didn't need all the fuss. But then, surprise, what if, on the day, I turned the tables, not to punish them, but to remind myself, and them, who I really was? I pitched the idea to Daniel the next night. A 2-part plan. Send out 2 separate invites, one for the public wedding, a generic town hall location, something forgettable. Then, behind the scenes, plan our real wedding, on an island, a place I had always dreamed about but never thought I'd actually see. We'd fly in our closest friends and the people who had actually supported us, and we'd give my parents exactly what they gave me: confusion, disorientation, and finally, a moment that would make them question everything. Daniel was quiet for a second. Then he looked at me and said, Let's do it. So we started planning 2 weddings. By day, I was emailing local caterers, fake booking decorators, even walking through venues I had no intention of using. I let Mom feel involved. I let her believe the narrative she created. But by night, I was speaking with a travel agent, coordinating with a planner in the Caribbean, picking dresses that would blow her mind. It was exhausting, living a double life. But for the first time in weeks, I felt powerful again. I wasn't just reacting, I was taking back control. They thought they stole my moment. They had no idea what was coming. The first time I saw the island, I cried, not out of sadness, not even joy. Just this strange, overwhelming sense of release, like I was finally breathing after holding my breath for years. It wasn't huge, nothing over the top, just a quiet, private place with turquoise water, palm trees swaying like they were whispering secrets, and a small white archway where we'd say our vows. I didn't want glam. I wanted peace. I wanted beauty, and I wanted it to be mine. As Daniel and I walked the shoreline, hand in hand, waves brushing over our ankles, he smiled and said, "This feels like you." That meant everything. We booked it immediately, 3 weeks out. The plan was set in motion. We would send the official invites to my parents, a few distant relatives, and old family friends for a wedding in a small hall just outside town. Something forgettable, low-key, exactly what my mom had suggested. And we made it look real. The website, the printed invites, even a fake RSVP list. I used a burner email to contact vendors and got quotes just in case my mom snooped. She loved it. "This is so tasteful," she said. "I'm proud of you for being practical." I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Meanwhile, our real guest list, those who had been in our corner, who had cheered for us when no one else did, received something very different. A gold-trimmed envelope, hand-delivered with coordinates and a plane ticket. Inside, it said, "Packlight, you're going to paradise. This is the real wedding." People were confused at first. I expected that. But one by one, the calls started rolling in. My best friend Taylor cried on FaceTime. "You're actually doing this?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm done playing small." Daniel's parents were ecstatic. They even offered to cover part of the catering as a gift. As the days ticked by, the contrast between the two worlds grew sharper. In one life, I was walking through second-rate banquet halls with my mother, pretending to be excited about plastic chairs and buffet trays, smiling, nodding, holding back bile. In the other, I was choosing flower arrangements made of wild orchids and local blooms flown in fresh. I was picking sunset ceremony music, practicing vows that made me cry every time I read them out loud. Living in those two realities was exhausting, but it gave me a kind of secret power. I started to realize how often I'd made myself smaller for their comfort, how often I swallowed hurt to keep the peace. Not this time. 1 week before the wedding, I met Mom and Dad for coffee. I watched them sip lattes like nothing had happened, like we weren't pretending this wedding was a happy family event. Kyle didn't even show. Mom started going on about how excited she was to see me walk down the aisle. "Simple weddings are always the sweetest," she said, smiling. I stirred my drink slowly, watching the foam swirl into nothing. "Yeah," I said. "Simple, but unforgettable." And in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was staging something. Not a show. Not revenge. A revelation. I wanted them to look back on this and feel it. Not the wedding, not the photos, but the moment they realized they never really knew me at all. I smiled back at my mother. "We'll see you there." The morning of the wedding, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the white curtains of the island villa. The air smelled like salt and hibiscus. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the waves crashing gently, like they were holding their breath with me. My hands shook slightly as I zipped up my dress. Not from fear, from anticipation. This was it. I looked at myself in the mirror, barefoot, my hair loose in soft curls, the dress flowing like it was made of wind. This wasn't a fairy tale, this was real, raw, quiet, mine. Meanwhile, back in town, my parents had just pulled up to a modest event hall, a brown brick building with a peeling sign and an empty parking lot. No guests, no music, just a sleek black car waiting out front, engine humming softly. Inside, a single man in a suit approached them. Rick and Linda? He asked politely. Yes, my mother answered, glancing around. Where is everyone? The man smiled, handed them an envelope, and gestured to the car. They're waiting. Inside the envelope was a card. Sometimes you have to lose control to see who you've become. Your daughter didn't disappear. She leveled up. Let us show you where she's really getting married. The driver didn't answer their questions. He just smiled and nodded, like he'd been instructed. They were driven an hour out, to a private airstrip, then escorted onto a small private plane. My parents, confused, flustered, still dressed for a budget hall wedding, were flown across the coastline to the island where everything was actually happening. As the plane landed, they looked out the window and saw white chairs set up along a sun-drenched beach, guests dressed in pastels, champagne flutes in hand, a string quartet playing softly under palm trees. My mom's face went pale. Dad sat perfectly still, and then they saw me, standing at the top of the sandy aisle, hand in hand with Daniel, glowing in a way I don't think they'd ever truly seen. Every head turned. Conversations hushed. For a moment, the only sound was the waves and the soft breeze curling through the ceremony space. They walked slowly down the wooden path, completely out of place, Mom in her beige department store dress, Dad sweating through his suit. I watched their eyes scan the scene, trying to make sense of it. I stepped forward. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad, I said softly. Welcome to my wedding. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she didn't know what to say. Rick finally spoke. You did all this? I nodded. With the money I had left, and with help. Real help. Silence. Then my mom blinked, hard. Why didn't you tell us? I smiled just a little. Because you already decided what I could and couldn't have. I just decided I was done asking. The guests watched, quiet, not intruding. But the moment was heavy, sacred. I wasn't trying to shame them. I just wanted them to see. Daniel squeezed my hand. We're about to start, I said. You're welcome to stay. I turned, walked back to the altar. They followed, silently, humbled, changed maybe, but at the very least aware. And as I looked into Daniel's eyes and began my vows, I felt it. Not revenge, not victory, freedom. This was my moment. Not taken, claimed. The ceremony ended just as the sun dipped behind the ocean, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose. As we walked back up the aisle, barefoot and beaming, the guests erupted in cheers. Laughter, hugs, music. It felt like the version of life I always wanted. One where love wasn't conditional and celebration didn't come with guilt. We danced, we cried. We toasted under string lights as waves whispered just feet away. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn my joy. I was allowed to just have it. Later that night, after the cake had been cut and shoes were abandoned in the sand, my mom approached me. She looked smaller, not physically, but emotionally, like the weight of her decisions had finally settled in her bones. I didn't know you had this in you, she said, eyes scanning the glowing island around us. I looked at her for a long second, not with anger, but with clarity. You never looked, I said. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She just nodded. And for once, that silence between us didn't feel like a wall. It felt like the beginning of something real. Dad followed behind her, quieter than usual. He simply took my hand, squeezed it, and whispered, "You did good, kid." That was all I needed. Kyle? He came too. I didn't expect him to, but he did. We hadn't spoken much since the whole thing went down. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the reception, drink in hand, watching the lights reflect off the water. He finally walked over, eyes down. I didn't ask them to do that, he said, but I didn't stop them either. I raised an eyebrow. Because you thought you deserved it? No, he said quickly, then paused. Because I was afraid if I didn't take it, they'd stop protecting me. And I didn't know who I was without that. That caught me off guard. For once, it felt honest. I'm not mad at you, I told him. I just stopped making myself smaller so you could feel big. He nodded. I get that. He left early, quietly. But that conversation, it felt like a shift, maybe a slow one, but a start. As the night faded and the stars blanketed the sky, Daniel and I sat on a bench at the edge of the sand, watching the last of the lanterns drift up into the sky. He rested his head on my shoulder. "Worth it?" he asked. I didn't even hesitate. Every second. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a reclaiming, a declaration that I was done shrinking, that I was done waiting for permission to be celebrated. My family didn't change overnight. I didn't expect them to, but they saw me. Finally, clearly, and that was enough. To anyone watching this who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or expected to just understand, while others take what you've earned, this is for you. You don't need to yell. You don't need revenge. You just need to rise so boldly they can't help but notice the view from beneath you. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is quietly build the life they told you you'd never need, and then invite them to witness it. So yeah, they took my moment. But I didn't ask for it back. I built a better one, without their permission. And if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to just understand, remember this: you don't need revenge. You need clarity, and the courage to choose you. I stood there in court trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids," she said with a smirk. "Why should she get them?" I clenched my jaw and stayed quiet. I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The judge nodded slowly, as if he agreed. That moment felt like the air was being sucked out of my chest. All I could think about were my children, Luca and Aria. What would happen if they were taken from me and handed over to a man who only cared about control and appearances? I couldn't afford a lawyer like his. I couldn't afford anything, really. I was barely holding on. But I was here. I showed up. And I was doing everything I could for my kids. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that quiet panic where your body is still but your thoughts are screaming, my 7-year-old son stood up. "Mom," he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room froze. Everyone turned. Derek stiffened. His lawyer blinked like she'd just been slapped. Even the judge stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what letter Luca meant. My heart pounded. He had never said anything about a letter, but I nodded. And as he walked toward the bench with that folded piece of paper in his small hand, everything changed. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in court afraid to speak. I used to be confident. I had a job I loved, friends I laughed with, dreams that felt real. But when I married Derek, things changed slowly, and then all at once. He wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous, and convincing. He told me I didn't need to work. He said I should stay home, raise the kids, and let him handle the money. "You've done enough," he said once. "You deserve rest." I didn't realize what I was giving up when I agreed. My independence, my voice, my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After our daughter Aria was born, Derek started changing. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was questioned. If I bought diapers without checking the sale price first, I got silence for hours. If I mentioned going back to work part-time, he'd remind me I didn't have a recent resume or say, "We don't need your help. We need you to be a good mom." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no lawyer. No one in my corner except my kids. He cut off the joint account and moved in with someone new. He hired a lawyer right away. I couldn't even afford one. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and stood in line for 2 hours, holding a folder full of receipts and photos of my kids eating boxed macaroni on paper towels because we didn't have clean dishes. Our apartment was small. I worked 2 cleaning jobs under the table just to stay ahead of the rent. We didn't have cable or internet. I used a prepaid phone and hoped it wouldn't run out of minutes if the school needed to call me. I washed my kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub sometimes. The water heater barely worked, so I'd boil water on the stove and mix it in buckets. Luca never complained. Aria would hum little songs while I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad it got, not even my mother. I was too ashamed. She'd warned me about Derek years ago, said he looked at people like they were transactions. But I was too in love back then to listen. When the court date came, I was terrified. Derek had filed for full custody, claimed I was unfit. He said I was unstable, poor, unable to provide a good life. His lawyer was brutal. They brought spreadsheets and photos of his beautiful home. They wore expensive suits and smiled like everything was already decided. I walked into the courtroom with a borrowed dress, a hand-me-down blazer, and a plastic folder with school records, attendance sheets, and a letter from our landlord confirming I'd never missed a payment. I knew it wasn't enough, but I had to try. For Luca. For Arya. That morning, Luca held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked. I smiled, but it felt thin. "Yes, baby, it's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. All I knew was that I loved my kids. I knew what it was like to go without and still put them first. I knew what it felt like to cry quietly in the bathroom after bedtime so they wouldn't see. I knew how hard I worked to make their little world feel safe when everything around us was shaking. Inside the courtroom, I sat straight and still. I watched Derek avoid eye contact. I listened as his lawyer listed off everything I didn't have: money, stable housing, reliable transportation. She said, "Her son wears secondhand shoes with holes. Her daughter's teacher says she sometimes skips breakfast. This isn't neglect. This is poverty. And poverty isn't a crime, but it is a risk." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, "Where were you when I was skipping dinner to make sure there was enough cereal left? Where were you when I was selling my wedding ring to buy coats for the winter?" But I stayed silent. I had learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength. It looks like instability. The judge nodded slowly as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank, and just when I felt like I might not make it through the rest of the hearing, I felt that little tug on my sleeve. Luca, my sweet, brave boy. He looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" The courtroom felt colder the second Derek's lawyer began to speak. Carla Dean walked with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to win again. She stood tall, her voice loud and clipped, as she laid out her version of my life, one stripped of truth, one meant to humiliate. She has no stable employment. She receives inconsistent financial assistance. Her apartment is temporary housing. The children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could already picture his face. Blank. Relaxed. Watching this unfold like he had nothing to do with it. As if my financial ruin wasn't carefully orchestrated by him. He was the one who drained our joint account days before leaving. He was the one who refused to help with bills unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But none of that mattered in that room. The only thing the judge had in front of him were the spreadsheets and photos from Derek's side, pictures of his pristine house, the fully stocked fridge, the private school brochures. Carla flipped through her documents with a quiet rhythm, pulling out my bank statements. She held them up like they were dirty laundry. "Your Honor, as you can see, my client provides a secure, consistent environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Ms. Moreau has no documented income, no verified employer. She's behind on utilities and was issued a warning for late rent in February. This is not a safe or stable situation for two young children." I felt my face flush. She didn't mention the fact that I had picked up every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash because formal work wasn't an option with 2 kids and no childcare. She didn't mention that the rent notice was resolved within days, or that I'd sold everything valuable I had to keep food in the fridge. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back, looking down at the papers like they confirmed what he already believed, that I was trying. But trying wasn't enough. I wanted to defend myself, to explain everything, but I also knew how that would look. I had been warned not to interrupt, not to sound defensive, not to cry too much or appear too cold. So I sat there, silent, embarrassed, burning with shame and frustration. My fingers dug into the edge of my seat. I kept my eyes on the kids sitting quietly beside me. Arya was drawing on a piece of scratch paper with a dull crayon. Luca was watching Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carla said the sentence that cut deeper than any insult she had thrown so far. Why should she get the children if she can't even afford to care for them? It echoed in my mind. Why should I get them? I held back the tears that were pressing behind my eyes. I knew my reality wasn't impressive on paper. I didn't have new clothes for them. I couldn't afford fancy lunches or ballet classes. But I was there every night. I was the one who brushed their hair, checked for monsters under their beds, and stayed up late hand-sewing patches into their jackets because I couldn't afford new ones. None of that mattered to the court. Only numbers did. Numbers I didn't have. The judge looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. He opened his mouth as if he was about to speak when I felt it. That small tug on my arm again. "Luca." He whispered, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" At first, I didn't understand. What letter? I stared at him, confused, until he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach turned. I didn't know what it was, but something in Derek's posture shifted. He sat up straighter. Carla's eyes locked on the paper. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer me. He looked at the judge. "Can I give this to you?" he asked. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca stepped forward, small and steady, walked past the row of polished suits and wide eyes, and handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into a strange, heavy silence. I could see Derek start to sweat. Carla turned to him, whispering something quickly, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across the words. His expression changed slowly. Confusion, then realization, then something sharper. He looked up, directly at Derek. "Mr. Moreau," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment the judge spoke those words, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to shift. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Carla leaned toward him quickly, whispering again, but this time her voice carried a thread of urgency. Whatever was written on that piece of paper, it had shaken something loose. I leaned forward, my heart hammering, trying to read the judge's face. He held the letter in both hands and looked down at it again, his brow furrowed. Then he read it aloud. "To Derek Moreau, from L. Becker, CPA. Subject, strategic financial shielding, divorce prep." Then he paused, glancing at the courtroom, then back at Derek. "This is a financial strategy letter, dated 3 months before your divorce was filed. It details instructions for opening offshore accounts, transferring assets to shell LLCs, and minimizing reported income in order to influence custody and support proceedings. It includes the line, quote, 'Keep primary custody if possible, but at minimum ensure she has little ground for legal appeal by appearing financially stable and morally sound.'" He stopped reading. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Every eye was now on Derek. Even Carla looked stunned. She turned her head slowly toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this real?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen between disbelief and a kind of quiet rage that had no outlet. I had suspected things. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. But to see it in writing, to hear a judge read it out loud in front of my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and placed it neatly on the bench in front of him. Then he looked back at Derek and said, "You were intentionally misleading this court. You've attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial deception. This letter is a direct attempt to use wealth and calculated dishonesty to deny your children access to their mother." Derek stood up abruptly. "That letter is old. It wasn't used. It's not even—" "Sit down, Mr. Moreau," the judge snapped. The authority in his voice startled everyone. Aria looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without looking away from the judge. He turned his attention back to me. "Miss Moreau, were you aware of this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "And your son found it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. He never mentioned it until now." Luca looked up at me then. "I thought it might help. I found it when I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then something softened in his expression. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned back to Carla Dean. I will be reviewing this document in full and pausing this hearing for a formal inquiry into Mr. Moreau's financial conduct. In the meantime, primary custody will remain with Ms. Moreau, with temporary suspension of the defendant's parenting time until this matter is resolved. The words sank in, slowly. I heard them, but my body didn't react at first. It was like my brain needed a moment to make sure I hadn't imagined them. When they finally registered, I felt my knees tremble. I sat down hard, pulling both of my kids into my arms. Carla Dean stood silent, lips pressed together, arms folded tightly. She didn't argue. She couldn't. The damage was done. Derek didn't say another word. After the judge left the bench, the bailiff dismissed the court. I stayed seated, arms wrapped around my children like they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. Luca leaned into me and whispered, "Did I mess up?" "No, baby," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I finally understood what kind of strength it takes for a child to carry something like that. And I realized something else. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth had a real chance. I walked out of the courtroom that day holding my kids' hands, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet. My legs were moving, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe them. He had stopped the hearing. He had suspended Derek's parenting time. He had believed me, or at least he had finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Arya's coat. I watched him, feeling a rush of gratitude that I didn't have words for yet. How do you thank a child for something like that? Or standing up and doing what no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do? A few days later, the court ordered a formal investigation into Derek's financial activity. I met with a court-appointed investigator, a woman named Ms. Trent, who listened carefully, took notes, and never once looked at me like I was less than. She reviewed the letter, asked questions about our finances during the marriage, and requested permission to pull all relevant tax records and asset disclosures from both sides. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Derek, on the other hand, did. Within a week, his house of cards started to fall. The investigator uncovered multiple accounts registered to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. She found wire transfers to overseas banks, cash transactions that were never disclosed, and tax inconsistencies that made it clear he had been hiding income for years. Every time I received an update, I felt something slowly rebuilding inside me. Trust in my own memory, confidence in my instincts, and belief that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long, I had been made to feel like I was imagining things. Derek had convinced everyone, including parts of me, that I was weak, paranoid, and incapable. But now, the facts were proving otherwise. The final hearing came faster than I expected. When I walked into the courtroom again, this time with legal representation provided by a domestic support advocacy group, I stood taller. I wasn't wearing borrowed clothes. I had found part-time work cleaning offices and had saved enough for a modest black dress and sturdy heels. Small things, but they felt like armor. Derek looked different, too. The confidence was gone. His new lawyer spoke in short, tight sentences. There were no smug glances, no fake smiles. The courtroom had shifted. The judge entered and began the session with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation into Mr. Moreau and finds substantial evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and manipulation of income to gain an advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved. He paused and looked down at me. Ms. Moreau, in light of these findings and your demonstrated commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court grants you full physical and legal custody of Luca and Arya. Mr. Moreau is ordered to pay backdated child support and will be subject to monitored visitation pending further review. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me was still bracing for the moment to be taken away, for someone to say there was a mistake or a change, but no one spoke. The judge signed the order. The gavel fell. It was real. Arya squealed quietly and hugged my waist. Luca squeezed my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes were shining, steady and sure. That night, we had pancakes for dinner and danced to music on the radio. Nothing fancy, just us in our tiny kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. I sat on the floor afterward, holding them both on my lap. Arya was singing. Luca was drawing something on a notepad. When I looked down, I saw what he had written, a picture of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it, he'd written, "Home is where Mom is." That letter he found was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a lifeline, a doorway out of fear and into something that finally felt like peace. He could have hidden it, thrown it away, ignored it. But he didn't. Because even at 7 years old, my son knew right from wrong. And in a courtroom full of adults, he was the one brave enough to tell the truth. It's been 6 months since that day in court, but I still think about it often. Not just the moment the judge ruled in my favor, or the look on Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there. The kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind that keeps going when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted every grocery trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up secondhand clothes and clipped coupons and said no to things other families might take for granted. But the fear was gone. The constant pressure, the feeling that someone was waiting to take everything away, that was over. Derek made a few attempts to regain control. He filed a motion to reduce his support payments, then tried to question the monitored visitation requirements. But the evidence was strong, and the court stood firm. He showed up to his scheduled visitations 3 times, then stopped trying. I didn't explain it to the kids in too much detail. I only told them what they needed to know. Their dad wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who showed up and stayed. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, and he asked, "Was I in trouble for taking it?" I shook my head and looked him in the eye. "No, baby, you were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded like he understood and leaned his head on my shoulder. That moment reminded me of how easily children carry burdens we don't even see. He had carried that piece of paper for weeks. He had waited for the right time to speak. He had chosen justice when no one asked him to. I started going to counseling. At first, it felt strange to talk about everything out loud, to hear myself admit just how bad it had been. But healing needs air. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much I had internalized. The shame, the guilt, the lie that being poor meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by looking okay instead of just being honest about how hard it was. My counselor helped me see something I hadn't before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong for surviving, strong for keeping a roof over our heads, for showing up to court without a lawyer, for putting my children first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job that offered benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I took it. I bought a laptop so I could take evening classes online and work toward a certification in bookkeeping. It was something I had always been good at, but never believed I could turn into a real career. The kids started doing better, too. Arya made a new best friend at her preschool, and her teacher said she'd become more talkative and confident. Luca joined the school's art club and had one of his drawings put up in the hallway. He chose a picture of a tree with roots, thick and deep. Underneath it, he wrote one word, growing. That's what we're doing now, growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's steady. Every week we move a little further from fear and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't fall apart. The truth is, I almost did. But when you're a mother and your babies are on the line, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up was never an option. This story started in a courtroom, with me being accused of being too poor to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest voice in the room, a child who knew what love looked like and wasn't afraid to prove it. We didn't win because we had power or money or perfect appearances. We won because we had honesty, because we stayed kind, and because even when the odds were against us, we refused to break. There's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice doesn't always come easy, but it can still come. And sometimes, when it does, it arrives in the form of a folded letter in a little boy's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with love. That's the day everything changed, not just in court, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment. Whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone who just believes in truth and justice, your voice matters here. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it.